MarkLogic World is my favorite time of year, mostly because even though I get to go and talk, and my engineers are there as well, we really get to hear from customers what they're doing,
Right.
and the exciting things that they're doing to achieve their digital transformation goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's great for us at MarkLogic is we learn from them and we learn about what their use cases are. And oftentimes they think of ways of using our technology that never have even occurred to us. So it's always a good learning experience for us as well.
And then the next year, it's a product feature.
That's right.
So our strategy and our mission is very, very strong and very, very clear. We have no confusion within MarkLogic as to what we believe is the best use case for our technology, and that's as a place to integrate data. It's a way and a strategy and a new technique to solve a problem. And very interestingly, from our lens, and we're just a little biased, we don't believe you can do the kinds of integrations of your data with any other database in the market. And I'm going to walk you through a handful of approaches that people have been using to integrate data. The next approach, and this has been one that's gotten a lot of attention recently, is this enterprise application integration. There's lots of application integration strategies, but these connector architectures. And these connector architectures essentially say, hey, I have a connector to this SAP thing, and I have a connector to this NetSuite thing, and I have a connector to the Salesforce thing, and so now I can share data between them. It leaves out the place that says, I'm going to normalize the data, I'm going to make sense of the data, I'm going to enrich the data, I'm going to add metadata content to it, I'm going to put security protocols on it. All that, again, kind of falls by the wayside. And so it's this continual modification of a transportation system. That's the analogy here of connectors, is I'm adding connectors, I'm adding new endpoints, and so what do I have to do? I have to keep rewiring everything. So what's a better solution? A better solution is an operational data hub. So what is an operational data hub? This is a term we put on it. We call it operational data hub because you're bringing it together, and you're not bringing it together just because it's fun to integrate data. You're bringing it together so you can do the three things on the right side of this chart, which is access it. You want to build transactional applications against it. You very often want to do analytics and business intelligence against it. And then very often there is something downstream that needs to feed the data to. In fact, some of our customers are now using Hadoop downstream for their analytical sandbox. This is something we've brought in. This framework exists. Our engineering group is now supporting it. Our engineering group is now enhancing it and building on it. And very, very simply, the way it works is you start on the left, and we have this concept of you essentially ingest your data as is. You bring your data in. You don't transform your data coming in. And the reason you don't transform your data coming in is because it's going to go through a curation process where the output of it's going to be this curated data. If you're going to do analytics against data, the results of your data with analytics, it's only as good as the data itself. AI, by the way, has kind of some of the similar problems, which is the AI brain can only be good if the data is good. It's not going to make sense out of bad data. It needs good inputs. Your brain needs good inputs to make good decisions. If you have bad inputs, you make bad decisions. So AI works the same way. So curated data and analytics encompasses the AI world as well. It says, hey, I can feed my AI engine with curated data. Imagine if I give a good AI engine curated data. It's really powerful. So let's spend a few minutes talking about what's next and what's not next. So what we're working on is not an autonomous database focused on lower cost of administration and management, but rather we're focused on the age of the smart database, which is about making your data more valuable. It's not about better administration, it's about better data. It's about more useful data. It's about doing new things with your data. So how does it understand your data and how does it reduce human error? We automate a lot of the curation functions. So in a smart database, we start applying things like machine learning and AI internally in the product to say, I can do better mastering. You're going to hear from Joe and throughout the conference about smart mastering, this idea that says, I'm automatically curating the data. What is data curation? I'm making the data better. I'm enriching the data, I'm making decisions about what the data means, and I'm applying those in the art of harmonizing the data such that I can do lots of flexible, interesting things with the data. And what's the beauty if I'm doing it that way? I'm not driving administration costs down, I'm driving the value of your data up. And oh, by the way, it gets smarter over time.
As Gary mentioned, what we're going to do now is I'm going to have 4 of our customers come up one at a time and tell their stories about how they're using MarkLogic, what their company needs were, what their business needs were, what the challenges were, what it was like. And our first speaker is Pranav Raoul. Thank you.
So I really think it's, we're trying to secure data in an insecure world. That's how I see it, right? To answer your question, I mean, we have, normally when we select products and technologies like MarkLogic, we talk about a use case, you bring the right tool into the organization, and then there's an outcome because of this particular tool.
Right.
And MarkLogic obviously offers a lot of benefits in that space. And this is a very technical conversation, and I'm going to talk about everything about the technical piece, right? So to me, it's really 3 things that lead to an outcome, right? So there's people, processes, and tools. You have the wrong people, the most sophisticated tool doesn't work. You have bad processes, your tools don't work. So it's a whole trifecta there, or a bad tool with great people doesn't work. So to me, that's really the full triangle of success, right? But what I'm most interested in is the culture, because culture really impacts technology. Like I was saying, you could come from the buy side or sell side and you have a different viewpoint. That's one way to look at it. And the other thing is the industry, right? The industry right now, if you see financial services, we're clearly on the cusp of an innovation or a disruption.
Right.
The other thing is the roles within an organization. You have various roles. You have auditors, regulators, traders, portfolio managers, accountants. So all of them have vested interests, right, in performing their roles really well. The next one is actually my favorite, politics. I have been guilty about this in a previous life in previous banks where politics is built into architecture, right? It is so prevalent and it's all for the good intention, but you have to address the human element of vulnerability, right? You do want to protect data. I used to think as long as I owned a system in a company, I had a career. But now I know I need to have data in the system. Addressing that psychology, the human psychology of data, is so critical because you have all these features within MarkLogic, So for example, element level security. Oh, there's a whole new way of defining security and what it means to have data ownership. So you can have a shared infrastructure, and now I can define security models in a way where different groups within the organization can have access to their own data, but we still have one copy of the data. I don't have to make copies.
All right, so next we're going to shift industries a little bit, and I'm going to invite up Rob Maxwell from Sony. Hey, Rob. Here we go.
And at SPT, we basically create and manage the distribution of television content, television programming to 190 different countries. Shows like Breaking Bad, The Goldbergs, SWAT, Shark Tank, The Blacklist. Shows like that are Sony-originated content that get monetized and distributed across the globe. So the number of media are expanding drastically. It's making our business extremely complex in terms of how the pie is cut up. There's the language that the show is available in. So in Portugal, are you going to sell the Portuguese version, the Spanish version, or the English version? That's just another parameter in the sale. Then we move on from media and language to the start and end dates that this intellectual property is going to be available. So essentially we're leasing content for use by channels for a specific period of time. So the combinations run into the billions. So it's a very complex manufacturing and distribution challenge that we face. We now take that to the backdrop of a legacy platform that, as you can see, has a 30-year-old mainframe in the middle. Our mainframe guy also retired on us. He wanted to grow orchids, he told me one day. It's like, oh my God, you're kidding me. This is ridiculous. We have billions of dollars and you control every dollar that's going through this system and you want to grow orchids with your wife. We condensed the businesses into one, a global business, and then we retired the old systems that we didn't need anymore. And in terms of our sales and finance systems, we picked the best ones, and we said we're just going to upgrade them, we're going to make them better, and then we're going to introduce what we call a sales to finance hub in the middle that's MarkLogic based. So that's kind of the mediator of sales transactions, and sales guys, they like to dream, they like to forecast, they don't want to be held to their numbers though. Finance guys have to count the money. They have to make sure the money comes in, billing, collections, invoicing, and all that. So we have a mediator type of application and system in the middle. MarkLogic was a good choice. One thing I'll comment though, at the start of this project, we called that middle box the conversion hub because we're Oracle based all over the place. And what we wanted to do was create a place where people could look at the data before it got ported back over to Oracle.
Right.
And in that process, we got confidence with MarkLogic and said, you know what? We're grooming this data here. Let's stand it up here and let's write our application around that. And that became the Sales to Finance Hub with MarkLogic.
All right, next I'd like to welcome Len Hardy from Northern Trust up to tell us a little bit about what they're doing with MarkLogic. Len, thank you.
We're actually utilizing MarkLogic as the core to part of our architecture. And what we're doing is we're putting in an event-based real-time infrastructure. We're building a foundation for the future. The heart of that is MarkLogic as the system of record for a number of different applications that we're building within that transformative journey that we're on. So we've started this, I think, the middle of last year. It is probably a 1.5-year program. And when we're done, we're going to have an event-based, real-time, MarkLogic-driven infrastructure that we're going to be able to plug and play different applications into.
All right, so last but not least, we have Damien Peleg from Chevron joining us. Okay, Damien, thank you.
So connecting systems and data is the magic ingredient. So maintenance data, equipment data, and what gets complex is data is generated a lot of different ways in the field. You have time series data coming up from sensors. You have a lot of different systems that have been constructed over time, and they have to work together and integrate together. So the challenges that we have is how to harmonize all this in real time. Being able to go up to equipment and look at, what's the run to failure, curves look like, maybe, adjust them, maybe you move to an event-based scheduling versus time-based. And all of those things we want to be able to do real time. So if you're out in the field with your mobile device and you're closing work orders and looking at opportunities to reschedule some of the activities in a day, or you may see something and you don't have the expertise to fully diagnose that, you should be able to open up a collaborative window with the people in our integrated operations centers where we have a great deal of expertise and get some coaching, and then take that video communication and tie it to a maintenance or inspection system record and save it. But all that needs to be harmonized. That data has to be harmonized in the back end and quickly. So when you're on a mobile device, you push a button, you don't want to wait a whole long. So we're talking seconds. And so that's what we're using MarkLogic for field workflow enablement, is to provide that layer of abstraction to help move the data up to the mobile platforms and allow us to do all these types of insights and optimization on the back end. Operational data hub, you can pretty much take that and put it into our architecture. That's where we see it. We have a pretty significant investment in big data platform. And so we see MarkLogic working in between our system of records for that very high degree of transactional integration and between big data. It allows us to come in and kind of a workbench type of format and use it to do those real-time types of analysis and optimization.
What I want to tell you about today is a new introduction for MarkLogic. I want to tell you about our new data flow ecosystem. And what we're doing is giving you a way to get access to hundreds of processors, connectors, templates, flows, to get your data from those sources into MarkLogic, connected with our tools like MarkLogic Content Pump and the Data Movement SDK, and do it with a really nice graphical interface. So this is a really simple example. You're going to see this demoed tomorrow afternoon. This is just a simple example where you can put a flow together that extracts data from a relational database and moves it into MarkLogic. You can take each of these operations, drag and drop them, connect them together, and have it build that flow for you automatically. And then you can take those flows and encapsulate them in templates. So the next person can just drag that template on, use it directly. And Apache NiFi was built for this very process. It was built to automate the flow of data and do that with a graphical interface. And out of the box, it comes with not just connectors to lots of those systems like relational databases, but it comes with integrations to systems like Kafka and Spring. So all of the things that those connect to automatically now you have access to drag and drop with MarkLogic. So huge ecosystem that's being added to every day and that you can add to. All of this is open source and that we can add to because all of this is open source. And we're taking that technology and making it available today. And if you look inside that data hub graphic, you'll see this unassuming little box called Smart Mastering. And that's the second thing that we're introducing today. Smart Mastering is an incredible collection of technology that can do fuzzy thinking. And what I mean by that is it can look at a record that says Patricia Richards and a record that says Pat Richards and say, well, you know, Pat and Patricia, those are often the same name. And it can look at misspellings and say, oh, it says Richards, but that's probably Richards. And it can look at address changes, not just as separate things, but correlated with the other data, and build a confidence and say, hey, I looked at all these 10 different records, and I actually think that they're the same person. And here's my level of confidence based on all these different factors that I've looked at that tells me that I believe that this is the same person. And do that intelligently. Do it in a smart way. That's why we call it smart mastering. And then, having done that, merge those records together. So you have a master record that refers to Pat Richards and gives you all of that data about Pat. And do it, again, in the MarkLogic way. What do I mean by that? I mean that we're not going to take all those original records and throw them away and replace them with a new record. We leave all of the original data there and create a new record for Pat that is linked back to all of the original data. Smart mastering, available today, available in GitHub. Go take a look at it. You're going to really like it. You're going to like the integration with the MarkLogic Data Hub. So today, we're introducing the MarkLogic Query Service. And what the MarkLogic Query Service does is it takes advantage of MarkLogic's really unique architecture to create the most cost-effective solution in the cloud. In fact, with the latest release of MarkLogic, you can add an eNode to a cluster in less than a second. Amazingly fast. And that capacity is available immediately to help you deal with spikes. As soon as the spikes are gone, take it away. No data rebalancing, no data shifting in and out of the cluster really quickly. And what the MarkLogic Query Service does is it does all that for you. So you can basically go to the query service and say, I want elastic capacity. Here's the kinds of spikes that I expect to deal with. Just make sure I have capacity for that. And we'll watch your load on your system. And as you have new load coming in, if it's needed, we'll add that capacity and we'll add it in a second.
I want to take a look at the data innovation journey going back about 30 years from the perspective of the enterprise. Then what happened is work groups got involved and they said, hey, we want to have a little bit more autonomy and set up these client-server systems. And so we added those. And the client-server systems multiplied. And the mainframe and the client-server systems all had this wonderful data inside them. Then the business said, OK, we've got this data everywhere. We want to take a look across the enterprise. Right? We want to make decisions based on the many workgroups inside the enterprise. And the first enterprise integration pattern was born. It was the enterprise data warehouse. And we had these ETL processes that supported the movement of data from the OLTP sources to the warehouse. Then the workgroups chimed in again and said, you know what? We kind of like this. So let's create these little data warehouses at the workgroup level. So they did that. And that was mostly for asking questions about the enterprise. It wasn't so much about running the business. So then another enterprise integration pattern emerged, and this is the family of EAI. Gary talked about this yesterday. And on this diagram, I've got the service-oriented architecture bus applications, and they started exchanging information with each other as well as passing information into the warehouse and the data marts. We have these three domains or zones where you've got the run the business on the left, the observe the business on the right, and in the middle, we'll just call it enterprise data management. And there was all of this information flow throughout the enterprise. Most enterprises look like this at a very simplistic level. And so I've moved the icons on the bottom, and we've got a scorecard. And then with ETL, what we noticed is that we created this divergence of run the business, observe the business that I showed you on the prior slide. And we accepted this as normal. And that created some provenance challenges that were accelerated by the data marts. So there was this momentary improvement in agility, but at the expense of things like security and trust. Then when EAI came along, things really accelerated. The notion of just copying data messages from one place to the other and putting the implications of that data behind a black box. That's what we did. So you heard about API first yesterday. EAI was API only. But there has been a track record of master data management failure. 2 years ago, I was talking to a prospect, and without even prompting, he said, deterministic, truth-based MDM is broken. I'm like, all right, that's a mouthful. He said he was on a project for 3 years, an MDM project, and they pulled the plug. And he said there were 4 million breaks in the database. I said, all right, well, how much data are we talking about? 5 million customer records. Not a good ratio. You don't have to do the math. It's not a good ratio. Collectively, you have helped us evolve the next enterprise architecture pattern that many of you need. Gary talked about it yesterday. We're talking about the operational data hub. And he said, so what is different about you guys? And I said, the one thing that we address that many of them don't is the one thing that has not changed throughout that entire 3+ decade journey of building the data-centric enterprise, and that is the database. It's the most fundamental place where you can make a positive impact. If you're going to govern your data effectively, you've got to do things differently in the database. If you're going to secure your data effectively so that the Equifax breach doesn't happen to you, you don't rely just on the app layer. You've got to do things differently in the database. So that's why the operational data hub is different, because there's a different database beneath it.
GDPR is the most complex regulation the European Union has ever produced. It's 4 to 5 times more complex than existing law. And it's also probably the most complex IT project that you're ever likely to undertake. It's master data management, enterprise application integration, entitlements management, and regulatory reporting all rolled into one. It's no wonder that 60% of companies say they are not ready for GDPR. And frankly, some of the other 40% are deluding themselves, because in a recent survey, 87% of CIOs believe their current state leaves them exposed to risk under GDPR, and over half believe their companies will be fined. Because despite what regulators may think, this stuff is not easy. It's hard to design and build huge Uber schemas that can answer any question that a regulator may throw at them. It's hard to design and implement complex ETL to move data from source systems into those schemas. It's hard to connect all your business processes to them through large-scale enterprise application integration projects. It's hard to do the things you need to do to comply with operational data integration requirements like GDPR. So here's what Acme's data integration architecture looks like. This is the MarkLogic data integration architecture. At first glance, it looks pretty familiar to anyone who's seen the big data architecture that I mentioned earlier. It has a place for data to land as is. It has a curation process that prepares the data for operational use. And it has a place for data to be served up to operational or analytics workloads. If you squint a bit, that as-is store may look a little bit like a data lake. And that curated store may look like a relational ODS. But don't squint too hard, because there are important differences between this architecture and the more cobbled together one that I showed earlier. And so I'm going to go through those. First, this architecture has one technology behind it. Because of its unique capabilities, MarkLogic manages all the data on both sides of the curation process. And because it's MarkLogic, you get transactional updates with guaranteed consistency, ACID compliance, temporal management, high availability, disaster recovery, full indexing and real-time query with a strong and consistent security model on both the as-is side and on the curated side. You also get huge visibility, traceability, and governance benefits, because all of these curation activities happen in the database, where activity is tracked and auditable provenance and lineage metadata is stored and managed right alongside the data. Here are some of the common activities involved in taking data from the source systems and then curating it into integrated data that's ready to use. These are similar to things that you're already doing with your data, but in the legacy relational architectures, all these things are done outside the database in batch operations that are hard to trace. In the MarkLogic Data Hub, these things are not prerequisites to getting data into your hub, but features and benefits offered by the hub itself. So let me just call out a few of them to illustrate why our approach of doing this in the database is better than the legacy approach. So first, validation. I talked about validation last year, how the relational world is chasing that single golden record that's valid for all use cases. But the real world isn't like that. In real life, different validation rules apply for different use cases. With MarkLogic, you can define flexible and fluid validation rules that execute inside the database. You can choose to reject invalid data, or you can accept it. You can choose to flag it so that it doesn't get used in the wrong way. You can choose to make it available for some use cases, but not for others, or for some people and not for other people. Instead of a single golden record model, where you have to come up with one and only one definition of data quality, you have a fit-for-purpose model, where data that's acceptable for one purpose can be rejected for another. Harmonization is the process of translating from idiomatic source data models into a canonical model that can be repurposed to serve multiple use cases. In a legacy architecture, this is typically done in ETL before you can even load data into the database. Now, I could expand an entire keynote on why this in-database harmonization is better than the traditional ETL approach. And in fact, I did that 2 years ago. For now, suffice it to say that our harmonization approach lets you build and modify your canonical model in an agile way, doing only the work that's needed to meet your business goals, without painting you to a corner for future use cases. It also lets you isolate changes to upstream systems or to the data hub itself from downstream systems and business processes, which makes implementation easier, faster, and more successful. Now, if you're going to integrate data from multiple sources, you will at some point need to deal with matching, merging, and deduplicating records. For example, the same customer may exist in more than one source system. You need to be able to match those records up and merge them into one customer record. This mastering capability traditionally happens outside the database using a master data management, or MDM, technology. But just like validation, MDM assumes that there's one right answer and that you can somehow produce a golden record that can be used in all use cases. Worse, when you merge records, survivorship decisions like which spelling to use for a first name have to be made before data enters the database. And once they're made, these decisions and their alternatives are both untraceable and irreversible. With MarkLogic's smart mastering feature, matching, merging, and deduplication happen inside the database, where all this activity can be tracked. Now let's talk about relational and semantic views. In a traditional architecture, you model and store your data in one form, and that's how you get it back. But different business processes need data in different forms. They may have different concepts of what valid looks like. They may have different ways of thinking about the same things. They need to see data in the language of their use case, and your data hub should be able to make that translation for them. So let's look at an example. This is an application that we built for a customer to help them assess enterprise-wide risk and prevent accidents. Risk information includes data from lots of places: incidents, loss investigations, change management documents, inspections and maintenance records, risk studies, and safeguards. All this information is tied to specific equipment and business entities, and it all exists in multiple independent data silos, each with their own vocabulary. This company has two different ways of referring to the LA area, but from the risk analyst's perspective, they're equivalent. MarkLogic's semantics capability makes it easy for her lens on the data to treat them as equivalent without having to touch and transform all those records. She can see a map of the concepts used in the data and teach the system that for her use case, LA Basin and LA area are the same. And she can get this view without impacting other use cases that may need a different view. So why can't you solve this problem by cleansing your data before it gets into the data hub? Because although these concepts are equivalent for the risk manager, they may not be equivalent for some other use case. Remember that healthcare company whose actuaries collapsed their 12 operational relationships into just the 3 they needed. From their perspective, this data was high quality. But because they did this, it was not fit for any other purpose. We saw earlier how smart mastering in the database lets you merge and unmerge records. But a data hub should also let you merge and unmerge concepts, even if they apply to many records, to give each business process the view it needs on the data without sacrificing data quality for other current or future use cases. So I want to emphasize this point. The MarkLogic architecture keeps all the critical data management activities where they belong, in the database. That's why you get all the agility, traceability, and governance you need without sacrificing robust, scalable, secure, real-time access to your data. So unlike these legacy architectures where the first use case is expensive and every subsequent use case is even more expensive, as you build out this complex and ungovernable web of data silos, with the MarkLogic architecture, the first use case is cheaper and easier, but even better, every subsequent use case is even faster and easier than the first one because you can leverage the work that you've already done instead of having to start over from scratch. So if there's so much benefit to doing all this curation in the database, then why does the legacy architecture do it all outside the database in a nightmare of ETL and MDM craziness? Why aren't relational DBMSs performing all of your critical data management functions? You should expect more from your database. You should expect it to help you manage your data. But to manage data, to really manage it, you need a smart database. You see, most database technologies just treat your data like a bucket of bits. They can store these bits and they can retrieve them. They can index them. They can execute queries on them, but they have no idea what they actually represent. A smart database understands your data and can map it to key business concepts, which can themselves map to policies and rules about how to manage it. A smart database lets you describe your goals in the language of your business rather than having to translate everything into application code. A smart database knows that this record is a customer and that this property of a customer is personal information, and that personal information is subject to Gdpr, and that in your organization, this means you need special permissions to see it, and that consent is required to use it for certain purposes. And a smart database knows whether you have that consent. And the smart database can use that knowledge to decide how and when to serve this data up to your business processes. So let's hear how our saga ends.
Thanks for calling today, Mr. Judd, and thanks for being an Acme customer. In the future, you can also visit our website where you can log into your account and see all this information and change your consent options from there. Did I answer all your questions and resolve all your issues to your satisfaction today?
Yes, fantastic. It's great to see a US-based company taking privacy so seriously. Many of my European companies I deal with don't seem to be as on the ball with GDPR as you guys. I'm really impressed. Jolly splendid.
Jolly splendid indeed. On the surface, GDPR seems simple. Tell me what you know about me, let me control that. When technology works well, It makes this kind of thing look easy, but it's only easy because Acme Insurance has a smart database. MarkLogic, the world's best database for integrating data from silos.